Today could be any day on the prairies of North Dakota. Life goes on as it always has, with the farmers and ranchers going about their daily chores. The hay is baled, the cattle graze. Normal continues as it should, for these folks may have no concern for the affairs transpiring half a world away. But today could be different. Scattered across North Dakota, Montana, Colorado, Nebraska, and Wyoming are buildings like these. Launch control facilities for the United States Minuteman ICBM arsenal. For over 5 decades, these facilities have remained on 24-hour alert, guardians of mankind's most powerful weapons. If the United States were ever under the threat of nuclear attack, things might be very different.
Flight ready. November, flight ready. Casper, flight ready.
3, 2, 1, turn, release.
The responsibilities of sitting in a council like this is something that I cannot fathom. So we took the Tin Hat Ranch down the elevator to the Oscar Zero Missile Alert Facility and talked to someone who once sat in that chair.
My name is Mark Sunlove. Here we are at Oscar Zero. We're 50 feet below the prairie here in North Dakota, basically on the front lines of what was once the Cold War. This control center here was directly responsible for 10 nuclear missiles. This control center was shut down in 1997 and eventually became a historic site, and now I'm the site supervisor for this historic site. In my previous life, though, I was a missile combat crew commander who worked in a very similar control center west of here around the city of Minot, North Dakota. Same function, very similar design idea, deep beneath the earth, at the control of 10 Minuteman nuclear missiles. I did that job from 1999 to 2003, so after what most folks call the Cold War, but still with the same responsibility and capability.
Can you tell us how you became a missile commander and maybe a bit about your training?
I was pretty young at the time. I was right out of college. I graduated from the Air Force Academy in '98. Went on to the Minuteman cruise. Began in '99 up in Minot. So I was 24 years old. So fairly young, and a big responsibility. We were all the missile combat crews went through about 8 months of training at Vandenberg Air Force Base, which is out in California. That training, taught us to basically be experts at the weapon system, how to control and understand the system and what we were doing with the missiles and how to control those missiles and command them.
Did they prepare you for dealing with the psychological aspect of the responsibilities of dealing with such a powerful weapon?
Not really. I mean, when you start that training out at Vandenberg, we went through, I think it was a day or maybe 2 days of, kind of a very open and full explanation of what nuclear weapons are, what they can do. So basically, all the potential crew members know what they're getting into. There's not going to be any surprise that, this is what a nuclear weapon does. So there's none of that. And then at the end of that day or two, it's basically, then it's, you go in and you talk with the commander, and I remember her asking me, is this something that you would be willing to do? I mean, would you be willing to turn your keys if it came to that, knowing what these weapons can do? And then, of course, I said yes. I mean, because crew members operate under the idea that the U.S. is only going to use nuclear weapons in the event of retaliation, right? So to use them was kind of like, well, yeah, because I assume if we're launching ours, then within minutes we're going to be getting hit, So it's like, I guess I don't have any problems with that,
Mark, can you tell us a little bit about the Minuteman missiles that you commanded?
Yeah, so the Minuteman, This wing started out, this 321st Strategic Missile Wing out of Grand Forks, they started with a Minuteman II version of the Minuteman in 1966. That missile carried a single nuclear warhead, which I believe was about 300 kilotons. And for comparison, the explosions at Hiroshima and Nagasaki were between 12 and 20 kilotons. So the warhead on a Minuteman was 300, so much, much stronger. Then in 1973, they upgraded this wing from the Minuteman II to the Minuteman III. So the control center didn't really change at all. I mean, some of the stuff changed, but nothing too dramatic. But the missile change was pretty dramatic. The biggest thing was the range of the Minuteman increased, the Minuteman III. But probably even more significantly is it carried 3 warheads. And the 3 warheads on that Minuteman III could be independently targeted. So say here in North Dakota, you know, you could hit, or let's use the East Coast since maybe more people would be familiar, but you know, if you with one Minuteman III, you could hit, you know, say like Philadelphia, Washington D.C., and you know, maybe New York City with one missile each. So when those 3 warheads come down, they separate and hit different targets. So that's a big game changer, because you go from 50 warheads or 150 warheads in this missile wing to 450 warheads in this missile wing. Each can hit separate targets. So strategically, it changed a lot. When launched from here, those missiles were going to take a northern flight path and a northern trajectory over Canada and the North Pole, and then into the Soviet Union. And that's the shortest route. And they're going to do that in under 30 minutes. So from key turn to detonation would be about 30 minutes. So that's happening extremely quickly. Once these crews have turned their keys, that's a no turning back point. I mean, there's no self-destruct, you can't change the flight path, you can't do anything like that. The missile's gone, it's on its way, and it's going to be hitting its target.
Can you take us over to the council and give us an idea of how some of the equipment works here at Oscar Zero?
So this is the status council where a bulk of the work is being done, and that's monitoring the missiles. Remember that the crew is responsible for 10 missiles, and on this bank of lights, each column represents a different one of those 10, and then each row represents a different status that any one of those 10 could be reporting. So you see this, the top row here is Strat Alert or Strategic Alert. If all 10 of these lights are on, the crew had 10 missiles that were what they would say is clean and green or ready to go, no significant problems with them. And that was the case well over 95% of the time those missiles are ready. Some of these lights are going to step on during the launch sequence. You can see enabled, launch commanded, launch in process, and then missile away. So missile away is the last indication the crew would receive that the missile had actually detached from the silo and was assumably on its way. At that point, there's no additional communication with the missile. You can't self-destruct it. You can't change its flight path. You can't do anything like that. So that key turn, that launching process, is a very final decision. The 2 that the crew, so they didn't launch, right? Obviously, or else we wouldn't be having this conversation. So the 2 that the crew dealt with on a regular basis, on a daily basis, is the fault light and the security light. You can see the fault here. Remember, those 10 missile silos, there's no personnel out there. So if any of the equipment out there breaks, the only way they know is the crew is going to get the indication here. They'll get a small printout out of their little signal data recorder, a little printer there on the right-hand side. That printout's going to give them some details. They're going to figure out what's happening out there and then what the details of the problem are. They might send out some tests or some commands to see if they can get that fault to clear, but if they can't, they're going to call back to the air base at Grand Forks and speak with the maintenance guys and get a maintenance response out there. And then the security indication here, again, each one of those launch facilities or missile silos is protected by what's essentially a motion detection system. Anything moves within that fence, it's going to set off the alarm. The crew gets the alarm here, again a little printout, and then they're calling back to the security control center, which is the security office above ground here, and they're talking with the security guys to get a response out to to that silo where the problem is. And those two things, those fault lights and those security lights, that's a couple things that the crew's that's gonna eat up some of their time while they're down here. Those are, you know, fairly common events.
Everybody's always interested about the button that launches the missiles, but it's not really a button, it's a key. Can you tell us a little bit about the key?
Yeah, so that's the launch switch. So this kind of covers a bunch of areas, but when the launch command comes, the crew's going to come to this red box. They have 2 personal combination locks on here. So when they assumed command of this control center, one of the last things they did was the off-going crew removed their locks and the oncoming crew placed their locks on this box. You have your lock and I have my lock. I don't know your combo, you don't know my combo. So it takes both of us when the command comes to open up this box. Once we have this open, we're pulling out three primary things. One is that's basically like a sealed envelope, and we're going to compare the contents of that sealed envelope with the contents of the message, and that tells us whether or not this is coming from a valid source, whether it's coming from the right guys. It's not any kind of spoof or what have you. We're also pulling out 2 keys. The deputy is going to take this key here out of that box and insert that into the launch panel here. And then way over on the other side on the command console, there's a similar launch panel where the commander is going to insert a second launch key. When the time comes for them to launch, they have to turn those 2 keys at the same time, and that's going to send the launch command from the control center here out to the 50 missiles in the squadron. So all 50 missiles will see that launch command. At that point, the missiles recognize the launch command, but they also recognize where it's coming from, and they know that it's coming from Oscar 0. And the missiles won't launch until they get a second launch command from a different control center. So the guys over at Kilo or Lima or Mike or November, one of the crews there out of those 4 has got to turn their keys as well and send a second command to the missiles in the squadron in order to get the missiles to launch. So it takes not only 2 guys working here together, but it takes 2 others at an entirely different location working together to get the missiles off the ground. Of course, one of the last things that the U.S. wanted was an unauthorized or, you know, an accidental launch. So all these things are put in place to make sure that that did not happen.
So one particular launch control center couldn't launch the missiles alone?
It could, in the sense that once a missile receives a launch command, or one of a few different things is going to happen. It's going to receive a second one right away, right? Because if we're turning keys here at Oscar 0, all the other crews should be turning their keys as well at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. So basically the system's being flooded with these launch commands. And that's kind of how you would expect it to happen, right? But let's say the other 4 control centers are destroyed. So we're here alone, and we got a message in saying, hey, you guys need to launch these missiles. We're going to send out our launch command. And of course, at that point, the missiles aren't going to respond. They're going to go launch commanded, but they're not going to go launch in process until one of 2 things happens. One is they get a second command, or 2, a timer runs out, and then they're going to launch eventually. So when we send out that first command, it starts this timer, and the missile expects to see another command right away. But if it doesn't, if nothing else happens, eventually the missiles will take off. But if there's going to be a delay, and that delay is classified, that time delay. If it's an unauthorized launch, you know, if you and I are sitting here and we're watching TV and eating our tater tots and just, you know, doing whatever, and all of a sudden we get launch commanded reporting in the missiles, out at the missiles, or an enable command out at the missiles, and we have no reason or justification for it, at that point, crews would start stepping through what's called an inhibit procedure. An inhibit procedure basically is like you're uncocking the hammer. I mean, you're disabling that missile so it doesn't go through with the launch process. So, you know, if there's 2 bad guys out there and they got everything they need to send out a launch command and they do that, the 4 other crews, if they don't have any reason for those missiles to be launching, they're going to inhibit that procedure and make sure that it doesn't go through.
Spread across the plains of North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and Nebraska are these unassuming fenced-in areas. If you weren't aware of what you were looking at, you might just pass by one of these without a second thought. But underground at each one of these facilities is poised a Minuteman III ICBM, each carrying a thermonuclear warhead with a yield between 330 and 475 kilotons. A total of 450 of these facilities remain in the United States Arsenal, still on 24-hour alert. Topside, there's not much to see. Just the massive silo door, a few air intakes, and a pretty effective motion detector. If the call ever came in and the Minuteman had to launch, the massive launch door would be blown open and the missile would leap out of its silo. For more on the Minuteman system, let's rejoin Mark Sundlove, former Missile Combat Crew Commander. As a missile commander, what was the scariest time that you had sitting in that chair?
Sure, you know, for me it was on 9/11 in 2001. I had been up all night. As commander, for some reason the culture was that the commander pulled the night shift. So I had been up all night, and it was about, and I don't want to get the hours wrong, but it was about, I think it's about 7:30 when that first plane hit the tower. And there's an interphone system in the control center where you can, it's like a direct line, like a direct party line to the other 4 control centers in your squadron. And the routine was, you know, if something interesting was on TV or something cool that you should check out, a lot of times, you know, you'd get a ring and you know, you'd answer the phone and they'd be like, hey, check out this play, you know, or whatever, you know, if there was a sports game on or whatever. But of course that morning, you know, it was, you know, check out CNN, and of course we all turned over, and here there's this plane that had crashed into the first tower, and we're all like, you know, how stupid could you be, you know, to fly that plane, and how could you miss that? Because at the time, you know, nobody really knew what was going down, and then of course that second plane hit, and I think that was about 10 to 8, or at least that's what how my memory works anyway. And I was supposed to be waking up my crew partner at 8, and I was supposed to be getting some sleep, about 4 hours of sleep before our oncoming crew arrived to relieve us. So kind of basically catching a little bit of a nap in the morning there. So of course I woke up my deputy at that point, and she got up, and we were watching the news, and then we started getting alerted. So they start bringing up, you know, across the nation, really bringing up the military posture and readiness. And so we saw some of that inside the control center here. You know, we didn't get, you know, as near as like inserting our keys or anything like that, but it was definitely a situation where things were pretty interesting, and that was definitely my single biggest moment, you know.
Are you aware of the keys ever having to come out of the red box and go into the console? Has that ever happened?
There's actually a couple incidences, and these are published. One was in 1981, and I'm not gonna, I think it was in November of '81, and you can look this up and you can, you know, find the story. What they did was they down at NORAD, which is kind of the command center for radar and space tracking and whatnot. They thought that they were dealing with a launch situation from the Soviet Union. They thought that there had been a launch, and what had happened was there was some kind of, and I can't explain this too well, and not because just because I don't know, but something had happened with the computers where they had loaded a training tape or a simulator tape, and they were perceiving that somehow to be a real situation. And the crews here had gotten to the point where they had inserted their launch keys. Now they hadn't received a launch message, but they had inserted their keys, and then, you know, because if they can, they'll prep the forces so when the launch command does come, you know, there's less stuff that has to be done to commit the launch. And actually, when we had our grand opening here at the historic site in 2009, a lot of the guys came back. And one guy came back that was on alert. Or when I say on alert, I just mean working. That's a term that crews use every 24 hours, no matter, you know, whether you sit down here and do nothing or things that get interesting, it's always called on alert. So this guy was on alert during that time period. And we had kind of an open mic time during the grand opening, and he got up and he told this story, and he was very emotional about it. You know, he talked about, you know, we had our keys in. He said, I called my wife. I said, what's going on? Is there something in the news, or, you know, is something unusual happening? He didn't want to tell her what they were doing out here, but you know, she said, no, it doesn't look like anything's happening at all, you know. And so he said goodbye, and, you know, telling the story, he's like, you know, he thought that might be the last time he ever talked with his wife, you know, and hung up the phone. And he's very emotional when he was telling us the story. And then they, you know, they discovered this was not real, this was a glitch. And then, of course, they backed down the cruise. And as far as real deal, no, you know, nothing. The closest I know was in 1973, during the Yom Kippur War over in the Middle East. The nation went up to DEFCON 3, or Defense Condition 3. Day-to-day readiness is DEFCON 5, and at war is DEFCON 1. And we went up to DEFCON 3 during that time.
Generally speaking, were these Minuteman missiles targeted at the Soviets' ability to perform a second strike?
Yep. The idea, and this is actually McNamara in 1962, talked about this idea that our nuclear force was what they would call a counter-force weapon, meaning that these missiles would have been targeted primarily at, you know, military installations, missile complexes, you know, submarine bases, these other nuclear capabilities within the Soviet Union. So these missiles weren't targeting cities per se. I mean, of course, there would have been collateral damage, but it was a counter-force weapon, not what they would call a counter-value weapon. A counter-value weapon would be something like you saw on 9/11, where, you know, they fly 2 planes into these towers, you know, kill over 3,000 people. Militarily, it didn't really affect us. I mean, it didn't destroy our capability militarily to do anything. But value-wise and emotionally, it was an extremely heavy hit to the nation. So these systems were designed to be counter-force. That's what we've been saying basically since 1962, is that we're going to be taking out the Soviet nuclear capability.
How many Soviet missiles were targeted at the Oscar Zero facility?
At least one, I would say. Probably, I guarantee at least one was right aimed at this target here. It's hard to imagine at the height that, you know, at least every control center probably had one missile, if not 2, dedicated to destroying it. And probably each silo, I would assume, had one. And then any base that had, you know, nuclear bomber capability, like Grand Forks or Minot, both with the B-52, those would have been targeted as well. Which is actually a pretty interesting scenario, because you end up with this very kind of remote location, North Dakota, where you think, well, they're probably not very high on the target list. But when you look at it from the military strategic perspective, North Dakota was probably way up there, right near the top of that target list. The Soviets wanting to ensure that we couldn't respond to any of their attacks. So not only would that bring about the destruction of these missile wings, but when you start to think about the agriculture that North Dakota produces, the wheat, you know, all of this food that's coming out of this state, and now, you know, having these fields radiated, destroyed, you know, by nuclear weapons and whatnot, the devastation is, you know, you can't even measure it. It'd be, you know, incredible.
There's several reports out there of UFOs interfering with launch control facilities like this. Okay. What can you say about that?
Right. Probably, you know, as far as UFOs go, I know there was, you know, one incident reported over in Montana. That was back in the 60s. And then one in Minot, I believe, as well. But honestly, I don't know. I never have really looked into it. But those stories are out there, those 2 specifically, but I've never looked into it in depth or you know, and when I was on alert, we never had anything that was unusual like that. So usually those stories come from either the maintenance guys or the security guys, because they're the ones that are out, you know, in the field. They're the ones driving around and, you know, and looking up, and meanwhile the crews are, you know, 50 feet below the ground, and where you can't tell if it's day or night, right? So it's it's a little bit different. But those stories are out there, and I guess, you know, for me, you know, it's kind of like ghosts. It's like, all right, I've never seen one, so, you know, I'm not going to tell you that you know you didn't see what you claim to see, but hey, it's your story, so, you know.
Anything you want to tell folks?
Yeah, so, you know, this site you can talk about all day, you can read about it, you can watch videos, but this, you really have to be here, I think. So, you know, if you want to come out and visit the site, you know, we're in Cooperstown, North Dakota. It's about 80 miles from Fargo. It's a truly unique site. We're going to take you 50 feet below ground. You're going to step into, you know, a launch control center that controlled 10 nuclear weapons. Basically, the front lines of the Cold War. And still, not only a history lesson, but a lesson on, you know, our contemporary nuclear force as well. You know, because these systems, while they look old and antiquated, are still in operation throughout the, you know, at least 3 missile wings. So, yeah, it's a Cooperstown, North Dakota, Oscar Zero Launch Control Center. It's a place you got to check out. So.
Thanks for the fascinating interview, Mark. And I totally agree. Oscar Zero was one of the most interesting places I've ever visited. It's amazing that both the United States and the Soviet Union built these massive installations just to ensure we didn't destroy ourselves. If you are ever anywhere near Cooperstown, North Dakota, the Oscar Zero Missile Alert Facility is an absolute must-see. If you found this information insightful, click the like button below, leave us a comment, share this video, and subscribe to the Tin Hat Ranch channel. Thanks for watching.